Independence. It's a word I've grown to resent, not because of what it means, but because of how my sister-in-law, Susan, throws it at me like a weapon. A woman should be independent, she says, usually after criticizing my life choices. To her, being single at 35 is a sign of failure, as if I'm stuck in some limbo while she's crossed the finish line of life just because she's married. My name is Amy, and while I don't have a husband, I'm far from dependent. I have a successful career, I live with my parents because it's practical, and I've built a comfortable life for myself. But that's never enough for Susan. She loves to remind me that I'm single, almost as if my marital status reflects my worth. It's tiring, but I've learned to brush it off, until recently, when her jabs turned into something more sinister. It all started a few months ago during a family dinner. My brother Dave and Susan had come over to our house, which they did often, and as usual, Susan couldn't resist making a snide remark about my personal life. "Still no man, Amy?" she asked, with that smirk that always made me feel like a child being scolded. "Aren't you worried you'll be alone forever?" I forced a smile, determined not to let her get under my skin. "I'm happy where I am, Susan," I said, trying to sound confident. "Work is going great, and I don't need a man to feel complete." Her laugh was sharp, almost mocking. "Work can't keep you warm at night," she sneered, and though I stayed silent, I felt the tension rise in the room. My parents shifted uncomfortably, clearly disapproving of Susan's attitude, but no one said anything. It was just another night of biting comments and forced smiles, or so I thought. A few weeks later, something happened that changed everything. I had gone to work early, leaving the house empty except for my parents, and when I returned in the evening, I noticed something strange. My bedroom door was open, and I never leave it like that. As I stepped inside, my heart sank. My payslip, which had been tucked away in my desk drawer, was lying out in the open. Someone had gone through my things. My first thought was Susan. She and Dave had visited earlier that day while I was at work. I rushed downstairs, anger and confusion bubbling up inside me. Susan was sitting casually on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. "Susan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "were you in my room today?" She looked up, her face completely calm, and then smiled that smug smile I'd grown to hate. "Oh, I was just looking around," she said, her tone light. "You should have told me you were making so much money, Amy." I was stunned. Not only had she snooped through my personal belongings, but now she was using what she found to make another jab at me. "Why were you in my room?" I asked, my voice sharper now. Susan shrugged, still unbothered by my growing anger. "I was curious. We're family, right? No need for secrets." "Family?" That word felt hollow coming from her. "You have no right to go through my things," I snapped, but she just smiled wider. "Oh, come on, Amy. If you're making that much, why didn't you give more at our wedding? $1,000 was a little stingy, don't you think?" My blood boiled. How dare she? "Susan," I said, trying to stay calm but failing, "you're just my sister-in-law. My finances are none of your business, and entering my room without permission is completely out of line." For the first time, I saw a flicker of surprise on her face, but it was quickly replaced by anger. "How dare you talk to me like that?" she hissed. "You're just a sad, single woman living off your parents. Don't pretend you're better than me." The argument escalated quickly after that. Susan was furious that I had dared to stand up to her, and I was equally furious that she had invaded my privacy. My parents tried to defuse the situation, but it was too late. Susan stormed out of the house, dragging Dave with her. As the door slammed shut, I stood there, shaking with anger. I had never spoken to Susan like that before, and part of me felt a strange sense of relief. I had finally said what I'd been holding back for so long. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were only going to get worse. Susan wasn't the type to let things go, and I knew she would find a way to retaliate. I just didn't know how soon it would happen. And then, just as I was beginning to feel at ease again, life threw another curveball my way. We discovered termites in the walls of our house, a problem that couldn't be ignored. The house was over 40 years old, and the cost of repairs would be astronomical. My parents and I sat down to discuss our options. We could sell the house and move, my dad suggested, though he looked uncertain. It might be the best option. I nodded, knowing that moving would be a huge change, but one that was necessary. Then, an idea struck me. I can buy us a new house, I said, surprising both of my parents. I've saved enough money, and it's time I did something meaningful with it. They looked at me, concerned. Are you sure, Amy? My mom asked. That's a big responsibility. But I was sure. I was more sure of this than anything else. I can handle it, I said confidently. And just like that, I bought a beautiful 2-story house with a garden, big enough for all of us to live comfortably. It felt like a fresh start, a new beginning. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud of what I had accomplished. The move went smoothly, and for a few weeks, everything was peaceful. My parents and I were settling into our new home, and I was starting to feel a sense of accomplishment. I had done it. I had bought a house on my own, proving to myself, and maybe to Susan, that I was fully capable of living independently. But of course, Susan wasn't finished with me yet. One afternoon, Dave and Susan came over to visit. At first, everything seemed normal. They admired the new house, complimented the space, and for a moment I thought maybe things had settled between us. But then, Susan dropped the bombshell. "We have some news," she said, her voice dripping with excitement. "We're expecting a baby." My parents and I were genuinely happy for them, offering our congratulations. But then, Susan's tone shifted, and I could feel the tension creeping back into the room. "Since we're going to have a baby," she said, "Dave and I were thinking, we should move in here with you." I stared at her, stunned. Move in? Into my house? Before I could respond, my mom spoke up, clearly uncomfortable with the suggestion. "There's not enough room for 6 people here, Susan," she said gently. But Susan wasn't deterred. She smiled that same condescending smile I had come to know so well. "Oh, there would be enough room, if Amy moved out." My heart raced, and for a moment I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was she really suggesting that I leave my own home? The house I had bought? Before I could speak, my dad, always calm in tense situations, stepped in. "If you two want to move in," he said evenly, "you'll need to pay rent. $1,600 a month should cover it." Susan's smile faltered. "Rent?" she asked, her voice rising. "We're family. Why would you charge us rent?" My dad didn't miss a beat. "Well, family should be independent, right? Isn't that what you've always said?" The color drained from Susan's face, and for the first time, I saw her confidence waver. But this is your house," she stammered, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. That's when I decided to drop the bombshell of my own. "Actually, Susan," I said, my voice steady, "this isn't my parents' house. It's mine. I bought it." The silence that followed was deafening. Susan looked like she had been slapped. "What?" she whispered, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. "I bought this house with my own money," I repeated, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. "So, if you want to live here, you'll have to pay rent, just like anyone else." Susan's shock quickly turned to anger. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "You can't do this. We're family." But I didn't back down. "You're the one who's always talking about independence, Susan," I said calmly. "Now's your chance to prove it." The next few days were tense. Dave tried to call me, hoping to smooth things over, but I wasn't interested in hearing excuses. "Amy, you can't seriously expect us to pay that much rent," he said, sounding frustrated. "We're your family." I sighed, trying to keep my patience. "Dave, you and Susan have been lecturing me about independence for months," I said, my voice firm. "Now it's time for you to live up to those words. If you can't afford the rent, then maybe you should move out." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "We'll figure something out," he finally said, though I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. Susan had always been so vocal about her pregnancy, but something didn't add up. She was supposed to be 6 months along, but her belly was still flat. It wasn't until my mom pulled me aside one evening that my suspicions were confirmed. "Amy," she said quietly, her face filled with concern, "I think Susan might be lying about the pregnancy." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" I asked, suddenly feeling uneasy. "I overheard her talking on the phone," my mom continued. "She told someone that she's not really pregnant. She made it up to get sympathy." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. Could it be true? Could Susan really be faking her pregnancy just to manipulate us? The next day, I confronted my brother. "Dave, is Susan really pregnant?" I asked, my voice steady but filled with tension. He looked away, avoiding my gaze. "No," he finally admitted. "She lied. She thought it would make things easier for us if people felt sorry for her." My mind raced, trying to process the weight of what I had just learned. The truth was out, and it was worse than I had imagined. Susan had been manipulating us for months, using a fake pregnancy to get what she wanted. I knew it was time to confront her directly. That evening, I gathered everyone together. "Susan," I said calmly, though my heart was pounding, "we know the truth. You're not pregnant." Her face turned bright red, and for a moment I thought she might deny it. But then, she let out a long sigh and sat down. "I'm sorry," she muttered. "I didn't know what else to do." But sorry wasn't enough. "You've caused a lot of problems for everyone," I said. "It's time for you and Dave to move out." Susan didn't argue. She knew she had no ground left to stand on. A few weeks later, they packed their things and moved into a small apartment. As for me and my parents, we finally had peace. Independence isn't something you preach. It's something